back here on the American Dream radio talk show. I'm Darrin Moore. I'm sitting in for Jay McNally. I'm your hard rocking, deep thinking, book reading, drum bashing conservative pundit. And we've been just at the bottom of the hour. We began talking about a book that Paul Ryan called very formative to his fiscal thinking, and I'm hoping that by the end of this segment, it will be formative to your thinking as well. Because there's three things in this book. Although I don't agree with everything in this book, there are three things in particular that are very important: marginality, the government wedge, and the Laffer curve. Now, they say that it's very difficult to talk economics on the radio, but I'm going to try to make it so easy that even a baby can understand it. Because, frankly, we all learn about marginality in our infancy. Jude Wanniski puts it in his book, The Way the World Works, this way. He says that price is not a single number, but it's a ratio. The two-equation law of supply and demand is learned in infancy. The infant demands a clean diaper and is willing to supply peace and quiet in exchange. Mother demands peace and quiet and is willing to supply a clean diaper in exchange. The terms of the trade are arranged when the baby whimpers and the mother hears, but she tarries on the telephone. The baby screams, however, and the mother hangs up and changes the diaper. One scream equals one diaper. The price of one diaper is one scream. This is marginality. In the same example, the infant learns another of the important concepts of economics, that all economic activity occurs on the margin. And few people actually intellectualize their behavior. Few people are able to think on the margins, but once you do, you will begin to see the world completely differently. So, if all economic activity occurs on the margin, we can say that 1, 2, or 3 whimpers elicit no economic event, nor does a muffled cry. Baby and mother come to terms at one scream. The infant increases its bid in what amounts to an auction market, bidding against mom's interest in the telephone conversation. The terms that bring about economic activity are not arranged until bidding hits a scream, which can be cashed in for a unit of peace and quiet. The point of activity at which the diaper gets changed is called the margin. The concept of marginality is crucial to an understanding of economic behavior because everybody knows that the straw that broke the camel's back is always the last straw. The last straw that causes a change in the situation. It is the marginal straw. The marginal straw is the straw that broke the camel's back. Even though it weighs exactly the same as the other 10,000 straws that attributed to the weight that broke the camel's back, but it is one thing to see that a change occurs on the margin, and quite another to understand that each straw is equally to blame for breaking the camel's back. What becomes crucial when we start thinking about the margins, let me now pivot into the concept of the government wedge. The government wedge is the cost of what it takes for an actor in the economy, whether it be an employer or an investor or a business person. The cost of doing business, the cost of the government in their private transactions. Let me put it this way. The wedge can be best described as a general rule of the economic model. The only way government can increase production is by making work more attractive than non-work. There are only two options consistent with this statement. Government can make work more attractive, or it can make non-work more or less attractive. Excuse me. They can either make work more attractive or they can make non-work less attractive. And of course, when you remove the work requirement for welfare, is it any surprise that we've seen a doubling in food stamp rates under this president? This is what Art Laffer calls the wedge model. The wedge being the government intervention in private transactions. Let me explain it this way. Marginal rates of all sorts stand as a wedge between an employer pays his factors of production, his employees, and what they ultimately receive in after-tax income. In the case of payroll taxes, for example, if an employer pays an employee $100 an hour, he must also pay his share of the Social Security contribution of about $5.50. Thus, the use of the employee's services costs the employer $105.50. The employer, on the other hand, also has to make a contribution. He has $5.50 deducted from his payroll for the share of his contribution and therefore receives $94.50. The wedge, the government wedge, then, is $11. Now, that is not the only thing that drives a wedge between job creation and driving people out of the economy, because there are layers of taxation that are involved. As many layers as an onion, and it stinks just as badly. There are tax after tax after tax, but also there are regulations. Now, the government doesn't really think about their regulations necessarily as being a tax, but to the employer, to the person that has to pay the cost of doing business, dealing with regulations, compliance, having to pay for accountants and attorneys and compliance officers to comply with the law, to them it's a tax. It still comes out of their pocket to be able to comply with the regulations. So when you combine the regulations and the taxes together, what you have is the government wedge. Now, let's go back to marginality. If the government wedge is so large that it is prohibitive for a person interested in risking his capital and creating job-creating enterprise, he won't do it. It's just that simple, folks. If folks are uncertain whether or not they will be able to profit from their efforts in the market, they're not going to put their money at risk. And so what we see here today, particularly with the uncertainty that is coming with Obamacare, we don't know how much insurance rates are going to cost to bring on new employees. The government wedge is so large that no one is creating jobs. And what's ended up happening is folks are, instead of going to work in the money economy, they're going to work in the black market economy, or they're falling out of the job sector altogether. Folks, what's very important is that we begin to think on the margins of life, and that we understand that the straw that broke the camel's back is where all of the activity occurs, not only in finding price, but also in opening markets in a way that create incentives for job creation and for economic growth. I'd like to have gotten into the Laffer curve, but it would have been a pretty tall order to try to describe something that Art Laffer explained to Dick Cheney in 1974, and it took him a decade to figure it out. But what the Laffer curve essentially is that you can lower tax rates and increase tax revenues. It worked for George W. Bush. It worked for Bill Clinton. It worked for JFK. It worked for Harding. It worked for, of course, most famously, Ronald Reagan, who lowered marginal income tax rates in 1981 using the Kemp Plan based on this book, Jude Wanniski's The Way the World Works, that spawned the supply-side economics revolution and spurred the greatest economic growth the world has ever known by lowering tax rates. It reduced the size of the wedge and put people back to work.